All righty. Hello, everyone, and how are you? My name is Pranithia Harmon, and I am coming before you again with part two of our series. This one is called Preparing Your Garden Soil for Seeds and Planting. So I'm super excited to have you with me today. I hope you have your notebook handy. Let's see, I have mine. Get my notebook. And I had to purchase this little pretty one because I wasn't using a notebook initially, but here she is, my beautiful floral notebook, and have a writing utensil. Make sure you have a pen. And also, since this is a recorded series, as well as live, you'll also have the opportunity to ask as many questions as you want. Once the video posts live, you'll be able to see it on our website. So hopefully you're joining me through there, and you have joined our garden club and things like that. So I'm super, super happy to be before you. I have about an hour to do this, and I want to use that time wisely. But thank you for joining me today. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to pull up this PowerPoint presentation, and just remember that if you have any questions, to go ahead and put them in the chat box or put them in the comment section and things like that, so that we can all be a part of the process together and get those questions answered in good timing. All right, so before you, I have the first part of our presentation. It's called Preparing Your Soil for Seeds and Plants. So once again, I have been doing this for pretty much all of my life. I started with my grandfather, just being curious and watching him. And then as time progressed, I took advantage of the knowledge that I gained and just started to grow stuff no matter where I was. So if I was teaching, we were growing things in a little kiddie pool. If I was at home, I was growing things in pots and on my balcony. So I always had a love for plants and flowers and food growing. And now I'm living in my home, and we're going on 5 years being here. And every year I've expanded my garden and have learned so much. So I felt that I should share with the things that I have learned with other people. And I noticed that gardening has just taken off since 2020 with the pandemic, and everybody is out there sharing what they've learned with others to help them grow food. And that's what I'm here to do with you guys today. So here we go. So we're going to take some steps into preparing our garden. So today's lesson revolves around the topics to make or to buy. So that's referring to your soil. Do you want to make your soil using soil components, or do you want to buy it? Amending and fertilizing, we'll touch on that. Composting, mulching, and then the care and maintenance of your garden. So once you have all of these things in place, you will need that extra help and assistance and knowledge to know how to take care of everything, because everything is starting to grow. And last class, we had a seed starting workshop, and it was so much fun. I shared it with everyone, and we were able to start our seeds. So behind me, I don't know how well you can actually see it, but behind me, I have my seeds have started to sprout. I planted those pretty much the day of the class, and then I continued to sow more seeds after. So behind me, I have just some regular tomato plants. I got them from a startup seed company, and they have germinated quicker than I thought they would. This was 5 days of germination with grow lights. So they already have true leaves on them, which I'm super excited about. And now I have some bean seeds, just regular bush beans growing behind me. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to continue to care for them as well at the end of the class. So let's go ahead and begin. All right, so I love quotes. I love a good quote. This one says, even the richest soil, if left uncultivated, will provide the rankest weeds. So you could have the best soil out there mixed with the best compost and the best fertilizers. Everything is just the best. But if you don't take care of it, you don't put nutrients back into it, you don't amend it, you just don't treat it properly, you can get weeds. You can get the best weeds, you can get the worst weeds. And I have learned that some weeds are actually edible. And as gardeners, it's our job to be able to identify those. But that's another story, another series for another day. But just remember, that's by Leonardo da Vinci. And the goal is to make sure that you're getting great soil, but also tending to it to prevent weeds that you don't want in your garden beds. All right, so here is a quick video. I couldn't decide if I wanted to put this at the beginning or at the end, but I decided to go ahead and put it here now. So I'm gonna press play for us and just kind of talk you guys through what I'm doing. I may skip around a bit, but it's okay. We're gonna keep moving. So here in my garden, you can see I have this raised bed in front of me. It's right now it's covered in pine straw. I've discovered that I really like pine straw for a number of reasons, which we'll talk about later on. But most of all, pine straw is biodegradable, so it will break down. It doesn't necessarily provide very many nutrients, but it is a way to have some decomposable materials in there, some microbes and things like that. What I do love about pine straw is it provides oxygen because it's not putting and covering up every single space over your soil. So it leaves a lot of room for oxygen. I also noticed that the beds where I piled a good bit of pine straw, I do not have any issues with weeds. The beds that I've also layered with lots of cardboard at the bottom and a liner, landscape fabric or liner at the bottom, very little issues with weeds. And the best way, in my opinion, is to prevent weeds is by using the big grow bags. Those felt or mesh material bags. I have a really, really big one, which is adjacent to this bed that you see in the video. And I love that bed. That's one of the best ways to prevent weeds. Weeds can't penetrate through that. There's no access to the bottom, but there's always access for water to flow out and oxygen to just flow between the plants. And that bed is actually doing really, really well with the collards. I have mustard greens in there actually. I also have kale growing in there. I just planted some radish seeds and everything seems to love that bed. So I'm in the future, when I do extend my garden, that'll be something to look into to buy more like that. So right now you can see me in the video. I am cutting away just the top portions of my previous, what are those? I had some previous plants there. I had like pepper plants. I had marigolds. Those are marigolds that I'm cutting. But this bed was actually full of peppers, green bell peppers. I had okra growing on one side. But what I decided to do was cut off the tops. And I learned with some more research that by leaving the roots in the soil, they'll just decompose and add more nutrients. None of these plants had any diseases, any issues. They made it through the entire season. Very little pest damage, very little issues in the soil. I was just so pleased with this past season. I'm looking forward to this one. And so I decided to just leave those roots in there. So I'm going around right now, cutting all that back, removing any weeds, which this bed had very, very few weeds in it. And I was just really, really ecstatic. And I hadn't touched this bed. I left it covered in pine straw for the entire winter season. Right now I'm in zone 8B. So that right there that I'm holding up, they almost look like, let's see, there's another plant out there, but these are called dollar quarter size weeds, and they're round in shape and they're flat, and they mimic another plant. I don't know if it's nasturtiums, the leaves of the nasturtium. I think it is. They mimic those, but those are weeds. They have long root systems, and the root systems just trail from space to space. And every time they make a new root in the ground, they grow a plant and they'll extend some more, and you'll just have a bed covered in them if you don't catch it. So if I can pull a full line of that root system out, I try to do that because they'll just continue to grow, which isn't horrible because I mean, the only thing I would find is that they're taking nutrients that you really want to put into the things you want to eat and not so much the weeds, but they make good ground cover, so that's pretty interesting. Um, so here it is. I'm still continuing to clean out the bed, cutting things that I don't want. And this is how you start that process of getting your bed really, really clean and how you want it. Also, if you notice towards the back here, I have my fertilizer that I bought from the nearest garden center, not like your Lowe's or your Home Depot. This actually came from a local garden center. And this fertilizer comes with all 3 nutrients in it. and it provides everything that you need for the growing process, like everything that you could need in a soil or fertilizer, it's there. And immediately, once I sprinkled this on all of my other beds, I saw immediate results. Here you see earthworm castings. Now I'm standing in the way of them. I have pine straw, raised bed soil. I have a bag of compost and then some Miracle Grow amendment. We'll talk about this more specifically as we go on, but right here, I have everything laid out just so you can kind of see it and see the process that I use everything in. So there it is. All right, so I'm still cleaning the bed. I just finished checking I'm still checking all of the different hoses in place, making sure that they're where I want them before I put all of the mixture, the soil mix on top. So what I'm doing right now would be considered just prepping my beds and amending them pretty much for the spring season. So I want to give a good start to anything that I plant in this bed. So remember I said I planted peppers there. There wasn't any issues with them growing, no pest issues or pest damage, nothing like that occurred in this bed. So it was a very, very healthy bed. So here I poured some raised bed soil blend, which I have fallen in love with. It's a bit expensive, but I love it. And the raised bed soil mix with compost on top, just a little like $2 bag of compost and manure. And I'm glad that this is a new compost and manure, like they just started putting out fresh new deliveries of all these products because it smelled amazing. It smelled fresh out of the garden. And usually I don't get that smell when I'm buying that compost and manure. And I bought plenty of it for my clients this past year. So I was really excited that it smelled so good mixing in with that raised bed soil. So I just put the compost on top. I went ahead and threw a couple of handfuls of fertilizer in there. It's supposed to be in tablespoons by square footage. So just when you start to put fertilizer in, just read the directions to know. But usually I just gauge it. I throw some in there. And now I'm walking away. I'm going to get the rake. And let's see, I'll move forward just a little bit. So there I am bringing that rake. And I'm just pushing everything around, spreading it all out so it can evenly go across all the beds. And there it is, nice smooth look going across. And I still have my bunching onions, which I love. They are just continually producing. They survived the winter. I had one little pest that came and visited the garden and tried to eat some of the bunching onions that I have growing in my other bed, but it didn't touch the other one. So maybe it was like, no, that's not for me. I fooled myself by eating the wrong thing. So yeah. So up until this point, does anyone have any questions about anything? If you do, go ahead and leave them in the comment section. And I'll answer those at the end of this. If you are watching this from another medium, go ahead and just send your questions to me. You can send me an email. I'll have that information posted. You can go ahead and send me an inquiry on the website, just using like the contact us link, and everything will be there for that. So now I'm just patting everything down, making sure all spots are covered, and deciding whether or not I'm going to cover the bed. But first, I just kind of stared at it. I took in the smells of the freshness and the excitement of having a bed that's complete. And I went ahead eventually and started to put the pine straw back on there because I wasn't quite ready to put something in this bed just yet. This bed will be used for different plant varieties and things like that based on my layout. So that's pretty much it for the video. And I cleared everything off and took a few pictures of it because I was so excited. But that's it, guys. So we're going to go ahead and keep going with the rest of the PowerPoint. So here it is. It says, soil, dear soil, what are you? So a lot of us, we know soil comes in a bag. We know it provides these nutrients for our plants, and it gives us the best outcome to have a successful garden. But what is soil? What is it composed of? What's the definition of soil? Soil Oh, soil. It's the true goodness, I call it. Soil is a mixture of complex minerals, dead and living organisms, air, water, and a number of organisms that are the decaying remains of once living things. And those once living things are, you tell me. Exactly. They are the plants that were growing there. They are the bugs that were living underneath the mulch and the straw and whatever else we put down, and they left behind their carcasses and shells before they venture out and become a beautiful caterpillar or a butterfly or whatever's coming from it all. So that's what that is. So just a mixture of things creates good soil. So when you're getting ready to prep your beds, and I know a lot of you are here watching, and you're wondering, well, what do I need to get started with my raised bed, or if you're growing in a pot? This particular set of materials, this is specifically for raised beds, but it can be altered, which I think I'll discuss later on, to go into your pots. So here you'll need topsoil, sand, water, compost. You can use pre-mixed soil, so that will alleviate the need for topsoil and sand. You also need mulch and fertilizer and amendments. So all of these things being present in your bed are what you would need for preparing that soil and making it nice and happy for everything that's about to grow there. All right, so starting out, to make or to buy, that is the question. So how many of you out there would prefer to make your own soil for various reasons? It's personal, actually. You could be a vegan and want to stick to organic measures and use that compost and, things like that. Or you could be what I would call, I don't want to use the word extreme, but very just more conscious of what you're doing physically to the earth. So you may be interested in growing in hay. There are hay bales that you can actually just plant directly into. There's peat moss, coconut coir, things like that you can even put in your garden beds, which are, better in some instances for your garden if you want to go that route. Or you can buy, which is what I do. I did do a combination, and all of my beds pretty much have something different in them based on what I could afford at the time, what was available in the store, and what I felt like that particular bed may have needed. So some of my beds have just various mixtures to create the soil for them. But I think I finally stumbled upon something that works for me in my beds and my growing style, which is super important. When you're going through this process of your gardening, you're figuring out your style of gardening. You're figuring out what works for you and what you can do to master the gardening experience for yourself. So if you decide to make your soil, and there are different types of ways to make them for different reasons, as I stated before. Garden soil should contain the following combinations. It can be a combination of 1 part peat moss or manure. Excuse that misspelling. Compost, 1 part topsoil, 1 part clean builder sand or perlite. Clean builder sand is important. It would be the sand that you would use if you were building or inputting a sandbox for your kids. It's free of rocks, things like that. So clean builder sand. The second combination, which I put at the bottom, is recommended for indoor gardening. So if you have like a greenhouse setup, or you just prefer to grow a few plants and things indoors, a few potted plants indoors, or you're keeping them kind of under cover, shade, porch, things like that, you can use this combination. It's 1 part peat moss or cocoa coir, 1 part perlite or vermiculite, half part composted bark, and 1 part worm castings. I love worm castings. Worm castings are amazing, and I can't wait to actually create a worm farm outside. I was given some materials from a previous client, and I was able to, hopefully I'll be able to set something up like that. Next is what I use in my own garden. In my own garden, I use 1 bag of raised bed mix. So I go out there, I look for a raised bed mix that's fairly organic, and I mix that with 1 bag of compost, as you saw me do in the video. And then I also have 1 bag of worm castings. 1 bag of worm castings usually covers a good square footage of your bed. It goes a long way. You don't necessarily have to use a full bag, but it does help. And then 1 cup of dry fertilizer. So everything you saw me use in the video at the beginning of class, that's what I put here. So if you want to screenshot this really quick or just write this down in your notebook, that would be fantastic. All right, anybody have any questions at this point? All right, good. So here we go. So this says to buy. If you decide to purchase your soil from a big box store, that's what I mean by to buy, our local garden center, the soil is pre-mixed and formulated to provide your garden with the best nutritional value. Usually this is the best route, especially if you're starting out as a new gardener. You want to make sure that you just want to take a little bit of stress off of yourself, because gardening in this process, it can be very, very overwhelming. Everything, there's information being thrown to you from all directions, and it can be really hard to identify what you need to do. So one of the easiest ways to mitigate some of that stress is just go out there and buy a bag of already mixed garden soil. So purchasing garden soil and deciding what to buy, that will be based off the type of garden you're planting. So I put there has container gardening, raised bed gardens, in-ground gardens, and in your greenhouse. And I consider greenhouse a different space because you can use that space in a different way than you could outdoors. It requires you to tend to everything that's in there, and it requires you to be a bit more of like a babysitter of your growing plants inside that greenhouse. So that soil blend might be a little different, such as using a seed starting mix versus actual garden soil. So you need to be aware of what you're planting. Next would be if you are using a container garden, you would stick more to the potting soils. People do and are able to use like the topsoil, sand, and do this really good combination. That hasn't seemed to work for me. I just prefer to just buy the potting soil because I haven't really took the time to break down the structure of what it actually takes to create a good potting soil. I just purchased it. That's not my time spent there. I couldn't do it. Raised beds. If you have a new raised bed, you want to make sure that your soil type is meant for the raised bed, and you want to use all of those different components to build the nutritional value of your raised bed. So my favorite is what you saw in the video, mixed by Bonnie Plants. So it's a new raised bed mixed by Bonnie Plants, and I love it. It has the right texture, the right feel, the right smell. You can see the different fertilizers and amendments already in it, and it just glides smoothly across, and it actually looks like soil. It doesn't look like a knockoff version of some mulch. So I really, really like it, and that's what I'm going to start investing in and using in all of my beds. And pretty much once you have a good cycle of that, just putting compost over your beds every year is good. So all of my new beds that I put 4 new beds out this year. All of those have new soil in them. The bed that you saw me work on in the picture, and there are 2 others, those I have to start using the new raised bed mix that I found and fertilizing them, amending them, and building up that nutritional value in those beds. A couple of other ones that are in my area, there's something called just Miracle Grow. They have a raised bed soil mix. A company called Whitney Farms. Their soil mix looks really, really good. They did really well with selling the product with the packaging. And that's part of why I bought the Bonnie Plants raised bed mix. And their packaging was also real pretty. And then Kellogg, they also have their own raised bed mix. So those could be something to look into. Next is in ground. If you're growing in ground, you cannot use potting soil. You should not use raised bed mix. You use regular garden soil. You'll see that pretty much anywhere, everywhere. Any local like dollar store will have that garden soil. And then next is your greenhouse. If you're planting in there, which I should have put here as well, but you're going to use that potting soil to pot up, and you're also going to use a good seed starting mix to begin. So it'll be totally different from the consistency of soil, and it'll be different in nutritional value from soil. And as I was listening to someone today, I they brought something to my attention as far as growing in pots. They said to make sure that when you have plants in pots, you are going to be their source. So if it's out of water or it needs nutrients, it goes through them very, very quickly. Whatever that plant needs, it's getting it from whatever's in that pot. And once all of that is used up, it starts to go into a stressful state. And yes, it helps with the root systems, but there is still no response. So it's stretching roots and trying to find, and it can't find anything. And that's when you start to have a lot of other issues that we won't talk about here, but in another session. But just keep that in mind. Just know that you'll have to, when you're growing things in pots, you'll have to pay a bit more closer attention than you would if you grew in raised beds or in the ground. All right, so now it's time to fill your bed. So I just put a few pictures here for you to see. We have a balcony garden that's filled with beautiful pots. We have a shelf system filled with grow bags, which I talked about. And we also have a raised bed garden all set up and pretty with, looks like a lot of salad leaves and onions growing in some of these beds. So really, really beautiful. So when you fill your beds, just like you saw me do in my video, you want to clear the beds of debris. You want to push any remaining mulch aside or just take it off if it's easy to do, to go ahead and start to spread your new mix and blend across the top. Now I say mulch in terms of what I'm using, like pine straw. I can just slide that aside with the exception of leaving a few underneath, but I can just move that aside and then reuse it on top versus having to start with fresh pine straw. But what you saw in the video was pine straw that I needed for my other beds. I'm just waiting on a few more of the seedlings to sprout, but I use pine straw because it's easier for the seedlings to poke through. Whereas anything outside of pine straw, I've noticed, and I've tried a lot of things, it makes it really hard for the seeds to start. They struggle a little bit to poke through, but to each his own. You choose what works best for you in your garden. Pine straw works for me. On the other side, you see add compost on the top layer of the soil. So you saw me put that compost in. I mixed it with the raised bed mix, just spread it out across and made a really pretty blank slate for the raised bed out there. But the keys to maintaining that nutritional value, which is what you want with your plants, you do not want to mix it. You'll see lots of videos out there. Some people suggest mixing it. You'll see some gardeners say, don't mix it. I found that when I have stirred up the juice in my beds, I use that. It really disrupted the nutrition of my soil. It really affected the foundation and it kind of just threw my season off, at least for like 3 months. And I would have to spend that time putting everything back in, amending the soil, adding more compost, fertilizing it again, and just taking care of it even more closely than I would have needed to if I would not have disrupted the composition that was there. So the best thing you can do is build your mix just like I showed you in the video and keep those layers of decomposition and nutrition, just keep them in order. They'll create their own little biome down there and all your plants will be happy. And it takes time. Building something that is stable and set on a good foundation, it takes time. Think about yourself and if you were learning something new and how important it is to build upon so that you can get better at it and improve at it. And a lot of people say practice makes, exactly, practice makes perfect. Actually, practice should make you better. It just improves on what you already have because there's really no such thing as perfection. So we just want to improve and continue to improve on our soil so that can give us the best results. All right, so here it is, to amend or fertilize. Now, this part is technically for those who already have beds filled with soil, the amending portion of this. Fertilizing can happen at the beginning of the season and periodically throughout depending on what's growing in your garden. If you see that something is not growing or you're curious about what to do next, this is also a way, by doing a soil test, this is also another way to determine if you need to amend or to fertilize. So you ask me, what does that mean? What is the difference? So here it is. It says fertilizers improve the supply of nutrients in the soil, directly affecting plant growth. So fertilizers are for the plant. Soil amendments improve a soil's physical condition. Examples, soil structure, water infiltration, and it focuses on things that indirectly affect the plant. So soil amendments won't bother the plant at all. They're just in there to go ahead and clean up that soil so that it can provide the best home for them and the best stability. But those fertilizers improve the supply of nutrients in the soil. That way the root systems can go ahead and manufacture this yummy goodness that we'll get when we have the fruit on our tree. So that's the difference between amend and fertilize. So here we are with some compost. Any questions so far, by the way? Anybody got questions? Put them in the comment box. Remember, if you're watching this later on in the replay, you can go ahead and just send us an inquiry, send me an email, reach out to me, and I'll go ahead and answer those questions as well. Also, you can visit our social media platforms, Instagram and on Facebook, and you can ask questions and be able to get answers from numerous gardeners out there. So don't hesitate to ask, and ask again. So this one is to make or to buy. Once again, that compost. You can decide if you want to make your compost or buy your compost. I do both because I am in a transitional period where I was blessed with a composter from a client, but I also was making my own compost in a paint, matter of fact, a giant paint-sized container from Home Depot, like a Home Depot bucket. The big ones you see like just stacked up throughout the store. The orange ones are black sometimes. That's what I was using. My daughter, I have a 2-year-old. She was 1 at the time. And by the time she made 2.5-ish, I opened it up and it was beautiful, beautiful compost. And I was able to use it and put it into one of my raised beds. And oh my goodness, tremendous growth happened in those beds. I was super excited. I was like, oh, we're on the right track. But I did take some of that to pre-start the mix, the compost mix in the raised beds that in the composter that I was blessed with. So I was excited about that. So if you look at these pictures, these are different ways to get started with your compost. So somebody's using just like looks like a trash can actually. You can do compost in a trash can. You can do compost by setting it up in little containers like this where you transfer your whole food into another spot, you mix it there. And as it blends a little more, by the end of it, you'll have a finished product to actually grow food or something in. And then up here is somebody that just purchased their compost. And here's just another picture of purchasing compost. So here we go. When you're dealing with compost, you want to keep these things in mind. If you decide to make your compost, you're going to have to get a recipe. I'm going to talk about this in future sessions, but you'll need a recipe for composting because you don't want that smell. It puts off a really, really bad odor, and compost should not have this strong smell of trash. Compost should smell like soil, like the outdoors, like green grass. It should smell a bit like just like when you first walk outside and you smell the air after a good rain. That's what compost should smell like, because you should have certain amount of parts of green to brown. When I say green, those are the materials like your dead leaves. Actually, those are materials like the fruits and vegetables that are going bad in your refrigerator. Those are plants that have, are dying in your garden, but you want to kind of recycle them. They don't have any viruses or infections or any damage. You're able to put them in the compost. That would be your green. Parts brown would be your dead leaves, your cardboard, your brown paper bags, things of that nature. Even paper, hand towels can go in there as long as there's nothing like oil or grease on them. You can even throw just paper towels into the compost bin. You also need water. Water is important because it helps the compost mix, everything, those green and brown parts, it helps them to break down into smaller pieces. Think about cardboard when it gets wet. If it gets wet enough, it'll start to become soggy and it'll eventually fall apart and break down if it's left on the ground. So that's what water does. It contributes to that breakdown factor of compost. Worms do the same. They contribute to that breakdown of the compost mix. They start to crawl through, they're eating everything that's edible, they're pooping it out. So you get your worm castings and worm tea. You'll learn about that in another class. And those worms just continue to do the work for you. Now, when I opened my composter out there today, I smelled a little whiff of like trash. So I know I need to go in there before spring really hits where I live and just pick up some more brown products to put inside there because I have a lot of green. I need more brown. And I actually filled that thing to the brim with just cardboard boxes, paper bags, food that we had that was going bad in the refrigerator. And so it had a good mix in there. When I checked it today, it looked as if I didn't do anything. And that's without worms. I don't even know if there are worms that made it into there. There's little holes that they can crawl into. I don't know. And I know there are lots of gnats. The gnats also help with the decomposition process. So it's all a part of the process. You want that. You want your gnats, you want your worms, you want them to just enjoy the compost. So, but I know that I need to go out there and add some more. Mixing. When I use, my daughter and I, we use the 5-gallon bucket from Home Depot to mix our compost in. Mixing was us rolling the bucket on the ground just to rotate it and mix up all of the compost and things inside that were going to decompose. For the compost that I was blessed with, it has little cups for your hands and it spins on a little flatbed system that has like cutouts for the edges, and you just push it and it'll turn around. So, those are things to keep in mind. And then there's containers. Oh, the container for composting is endless. There's plastic ones you can keep inside of your kitchen. There's ones you can stash in your refrigerator. There's composting bags that decompose. There's big composters, small ones, composters you can sit in the middle of your garden bed. Like the composting is endless. So do your research, pick the one that works for you, small or large, or start with something that you can afford. Affordability is key. Don't go out there buying something that you really can't afford or know what to do with or need. That's important as well. Next is buying compost. So buying compost is where the hard part is done for you. They do the mixing. They do the, 5 parts green, the 2 parts brown. They have the water. They use the worms. They took the worms out. But you may not know exactly what is in the mix. So, when you're at home with your compost, so you're putting X things into your compost to decompose, but you don't know exactly what they have done at the big factory setting to make this compost. Is it really organic? Were there any chemicals used? Was it around any chemicals that could have just made its way onto this particular batch of compost? So those are things to keep in mind when you buy your compost. Next thing to keep in mind, just watching the time, guys, we're doing good, 6:43. All right, my time. Next is to ask for help. If you do want to start your compost on your own, if you want to buy your compost, the best thing to do is seek out other gardeners, join groups on social media, visit in your local community. For me here where I live, there are farmers markets pretty much 45 minutes of each other. And they have a little table that they set up, and it says, ask a gardener. You can walk to that table. There's usually 2 or 3 people sitting behind there. They look as if they've been gardening for years and very experienced. And you just ask them questions about what you want to do, or my company. And there are lots of companies like myself out there that will answer your questions in general about gardening and starting a garden and what you can do. So if you have questions about composting, then that would be your best bet to go ahead and ask those questions. So here's the big one: mulching. What type of mulch should I choose? That depends on you and what works in your garden. All I can suggest is do good research, because I've noticed with mulch, it's climate based, because if you live in a really, really wet place and your zone is a place where you get lots of rain, then the mulch, you want to have a mulch where it's not keeping water, too much water in your soil. It's allowing it to drain. Most mulches are made to maintain water and keep water. And if that's the case, you want to leave room for the sun to be able to penetrate at least the top layer and remove that excess water from your garden if you get, really, really big rainstorms. Like it says here, it says mulch helps reduce soil erosion and soil compaction. So depending on the mulch you use, if you look at the mulch that he has, these are actually, or she, little tiny shreds. This mulch is similar to pine bark mulch, and you'll see it's already like chopped up. There's also a cypress blend that's already chopped up and really, really fine. And to me, that mulch leaves room for your seedlings to push through. So if you start with seeds instead of little plants, or you have a small, really, really small seedling and you put it out in the garden, it'll still have that access to push through without anything being in its way. So in other words, the bigger the size of the mulch, the harder it will be for your seeds to push through. So that's why I lean more towards pine straw. I've used cypress, chopped up really fine. I've tried the bark mulch. I've tried larger pieces of mulch, and over time, I've just figured out what works for me. And right now, that's pine straw. But no matter what you use that you consider to be mulch, mulch helps maintain optimal soil temperatures by creating a barrier from heat and cold, which is what I mentioned before. Mulch helps increase soil nutrition as it decomposes by improving soil structure, and it provides better drainage and better use of nutrients. And the fact that it decomposes is really, really awesome, because whatever you put in your soil and on top of your soil, you want it to decompose to just add more life and nutritional value to the soil. That means the better it is, the better things will grow. Very, very simple. So over here on the right-hand side, I put what I use. I use pine straw, as I mentioned before. I use it because seedlings are able to just grow straight through it. And then you're able to identify what's green from what's brown or that tan color that pine straw has. Really easy to identify and see. Really easy to move out of the way. So even when it's wet, I can still kind of push it out of the way if something's trying to grow there and it's having a hard time. So it's not like that mulch that'll just sit if it's wet and it mixes in with the soil so well that you have issues moving it out of the way and possibly interrupt the root system of a growing plant. Next is how it breaks down. I actually left a little, maybe a fourth of a layer of pine straw when I was cleaning out the raised bed, as you saw in the video. I left that there because I knew it would break down. It doesn't really provide much nutritional value, but it will provide space for oxygen to flow through. So that's one of the things you want in your raised beds. So it'll become organic matter. It stays in place. Rain, sleet, snow, water, wind, the pine straw did not blow away. I did not wake up after the hurricane and see pine straw all over my yard. It actually worked out better than I thought it would. Not to say that other mulches I've had that issue with, but I have had other mulches decompose so quickly that I've had to replace it. Whereas the pine straw, I am not having to replace it as often. So it's really standing the test of time. And last, it's porous in the sense of it's a little thin piece of material, and you're able to have spaces in between, which leaves room for oxygen to just pour through. But then it covers so much. One little handful can cover like a good square footage of your bed and leave room for oxygen, leave room for plants to grow. And that's what you want in a good mulch. So, but like I said, at the end of the day, choose what works for you. So last but not least, we're talking about care and maintenance. Before we do, questions, anybody? Any questions? And remember, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them out there in the comment section. If you're watching this video on our website, if you need to leave an inquiry, do that, or visit our social media platforms and ask your questions. All right, but last but not least, we're talking about care and maintenance and how we're here to help you. That's the most important thing. you want to remember. So I suggest you screenshot this or write it down. These are the most important things when you're prepping this soil. You want to have mulch. You want it to be a good mulch resource. You can mulch as needed. Like I said, some mulch decomposes really quickly. You have to replace it, so mulch is needed. It may get blown away. Replace it. You'll need it. Some gardeners, though, do not mulch at all. They tend to plant so much that the sun is not able to reach the soil per se and create an environment where weeds want to grow. They're kind of deterred from growing there because there's not much room for them. The nutrients are already being used up by the number of plants growing. And that's something that I want to do in my beds this year. I want to grow so much in my beds that the weeds just have no room to grow. They get kicked out all on their own. So that's the plan. Fingers crossed. All right, mulch. Try different ones. They retain water, they can break down. Just keep trying. Watering is a big one. Before you start to plant. So the bed that you saw me do today, I did not water it because I wasn't ready to plant it. But I am going to water just before I plant in it because I want everything that I put at the top of that bed to seep through all the way down through that bed. I want all of the microbes in there to start working together to create a good system from top to bottom before I plant my first plants. So usually in about a week's time, anywhere from a week to 3 weeks, depending on the time you have that you can spend giving that bed an opportunity to just mesh together and make friends with all the nutrients. Lastly, if you can't water with a watering can or by hand with the hose pipe, you can add a drip irrigation system. If you might be a work from home person, or you actually might have to work at, just leave your home to work or vacations, things like that. Sometimes a simple little drip irrigation system can change everything. You put it on a timer. That timer can be set by your phone and controlled by your phone. So there's many things out there to do that. I did a little basic drip irrigation system, which I have to make some updates to and rearrange for the new year, but I really, really like it. So I will suggest a drip irrigation system. Next is compost, amend, and fertilize. So this is if you notice that you have any issues in your garden beds, you want to refresh that soil for the planting season. So you would use compost to do that. You might have to amend soil that you've used previously, and you definitely will want to add a layer of fertilizer on there to just give those plants a jump start when you put them into the beds. All right, so that is the end, and it is 6:52 p.m. So we did great with time. And in this picture, actually, you can see this bed in the front. This is the one that I worked on in the video you saw. And look how beautiful. This is one of my hot banana peppers. This one grew, it was almost as tall as me. Definitely taller than my 2-year-old. This is the 2-year-old height. And this was a grown-up. Here I had some okra, I had a couple of bell peppers, but this was at the beginning of the season, and by the time it was over, this entire bed was filled with peppers growing, all types. So I was super excited, and I've realized from last year's experience that I am definitely a pepper and bean person. I love peppers, I love beans. So not a good combination, I don't think, unless peppers are going to be your seasoning, but yeah. So and in this picture, if you're curious about what's going on, just lots of life bursting forth. I created like an apparatus to hold up my tomatoes that were growing all the way across this bed. They did okay, only put off a few. I think it was just too many tomatoes in this bed. It was just an experiment, and they just took a lot of nutrition from each other. And this kind of happened by coincidence, maybe. No, that's not the word I want to use. Accidentally, actually. Some of these belong to a client, but the client kept pushing back the installment date for her beds. So I had to put these in the ground because they weren't doing so well. And I went ahead, planted them, and then that's pretty much what it is. I gave her new plants and planted these, and that was the start of something new. And then back here I had like cucamelon, watermelon, all melon things growing in that bed. So yeah, it was a fun experience. But here you can see it says I'm a certified garden consultant. You can reach me by email. You can see that on the left. Visit our website, or you can go to our Facebook or Instagram social media pages and just have a great networking time. There's other gardeners that visit the pages frequently, other people that can answer your questions besides myself, or you can actually book a consultation and get that extra support and help that you need. And Instagram has a lot of fun videos of myself, my family, us being in the garden, and lots of great information just help keep you motivated and going with your own garden. And lastly, these are our upcoming classes. So if you have to go, I understand, but I just wanted to share these with you. Saturday, March 5th, we're talking about companion planting. Saturday, March 12th is a vertical gardening class. And Saturday, which will be our final class, Saturday, March 19th, is planting, care, and maintenance. So I hope to see you in the next class, because this is where I'm going to go ahead and talk about these different things. So if you're interested in these classes, it's $15 per class, or you can take all 5 classes, watch them at your own leisure for $50. All right. So thank you for joining me. I had such a wonderful time. Remember to visit those platforms, join all of the groups that you find us in, and become a part of a great gardening makeup for the binge. We love you so much, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye.